Just to spell things out, today we'll, please God, finish up what we started last week. Just, if I can see, how many, if any, are there people who are here now that were not here last week? Just to see how much of a review we need to do. Okay, one, okay. So that's okay, that's okay. And then we'll move on to something else today. Hopefully next week we'll do a couple of different topics that are somewhat loosely related, and then by the last week it'll be more like Haggadah, short, quick thoughts, and we'll go through it that way. That should be enough to get us ready. Although I'm definitely open to suggestions if you all have them. So let's do a quick recap of where we were last week. And then hopefully we'll finish it up, have time for questions, comments, screaming, whatever else is in store. And then we'll get to some real Mitzrayim stuff. Fine. So the question that we started with last week, just to remind ourselves, a week is a little while to go between times learning together. Is on a few different issues. How are we supposed to grapple with our 21st century Western sensibilities, certain parts, certain topics in Torah law that seem to conflict with our contemporary notions of what is moral and what's good. And the topics that we started talking about are slavery, which seems like a no-brainer today, but is licensed by the Torah. Again, not necessarily endorsed, but licensed. Number two is the form of government, where the only government that the Torah describes is a monarchy. Today, just about everyone has moved over to democracy, and yet the Torah didn't go in that direction. Gender imbalance in marriage and divorce. What we noted over there, and we're going to be picking up pretty much over there, so let's just review in a little bit greater detail, is that comes in, halachically, that comes in basically three forms, right? One of which is ceremonial, where the marriage ceremony and the divorce ceremony, the man always is playing an active role, and the woman is playing a passive role. Right? The Kedushin involves the man giving the woman a ring, the man saying the passage, and the woman receiving it. And with Gerushin, with divorce, the man writes and delivers the get to the woman. But outside of ceremony, which is interesting and important and potentially difficult to deal with, but in terms of practical way it impacts our lives, so that's not going to be as grave an issue as the other two areas where there is real, genuine power imbalance, which are, number one, the Torah's license of polygamy, that biblically men are allowed to have multiple wives, whereas a woman cannot have more than one husband. And at the same time, one-sided divorce, that a man is able and has the ability to divorce his wife even without her consent, without her signing on to it. And a woman is unable to do that in the other direction. Those two combined mean that when a marriage starts to deteriorate, the man has options, either within the marriage or to get out of the marriage, to be able to move on, whereas the woman really has no option. And what we pointed out is that a little more than 1,000 years ago, Rabbi Gershom went and really leveled the playing field as much as he was able to do, to the point where, with two of his cherems, right? He has three famous cherems that he imposed, one of which is not relevant to us. He told us that we're not allowed to read other people's mail. The two that are relevant to us are, he said, no more polygamy, no more one-sided divorce. Right? So those two, at least in the Ashkenazic world, I know in the Sephardic world, they were never hit by Rabbi Gershom. Polygamy lasted for a lot longer. I know someone well who, when she got engaged and her parents found out that her husband's grandfather had multiple wives, so they were thrown. Nice Queen's girl. But so at least within the Ashkenazic world, this Rabbi Gershom a while ago really evened up the playing field, except for extreme situations where you have someone who really uses the get as a weapon in a dissolved marriage. So that, because as we started pointing out, when with Rabbi Gershom, if the restriction is rabbinically imposed, so then the rabbis can also tell you when to make an exception and how to make an exception. If it's biblically imposed, if the Torah is saying this woman is still married, so then it's very, very difficult for, if not, for the moment, it seems very, very challenging. Who knows what's going to be? But you can't just wave a magic halachic wand and say that that's not the case, right? The way that halacha evolves, the primary way that halacha evolves, is, as we're seeing with Rabbeinu Gershom, it's not that hard in the face of societal dysfunction or human suffering to say that what the Torah had previously licensed, we're now going to restrict. Right? Don't do what you had previously been allowed to do. Don't have slaves. Don't have more than one wife. That's not hard to do. Just permit that which had previously been restricted is going to be far, far more challenging, if possible at all. Generally, that's going to be difficult. Yeah.
So last week you mentioned, or the issue was raised of a woman refusing to accept a get, and the way around that is with the heter rabbanim. So are they using the loophole? Which of Rabbeinu Gershom's takana are they overriding? Are they overriding the one of polygamy, or are they overriding the one of a woman?
So my understanding is, and I was surprised, is that they're overriding polygamy.
So that was my understanding as well. Does it ever happen that a man who is refusing to give a get that the rabbis allow him to remarry?
Yes, if they can.
Because how can they do that? How can the rabbis do that? In other words, they can
you're
override
right.
in the case. In other words, that means he's free and she isn't, because the get basically is
So I don't.
marriage.
Right.
I mean, that is
Right.
what
So I don't. I think Batei Din that are responsible, I can't imagine a scenario where that would be acceptable. So I would hope that doesn't happen. Not all Batei Din act responsibly all the time. It's very important when you're looking for a beis din to research and make sure that they're above board.
So when, in other words, they've researched that there's no get. In other words, they've overridden.
I don't know that this has ever happened, but if you tell me that it has, I believe you. I don't know. Okay, so this, I don't know.
It's happened.
Fine, okay, I believe you. I would say that is very problematic. I can't imagine a scenario where that would be okay. Why? I can't imagine a scenario that would be.
And if it were okay for that person, given that it says Kedat Moshe Yisrael B'Kinyan, does then that, in other words, does one basically need to accept that, or does it need to be more universally accepted? In other words, in whose eyes is this couple really married?
I think that's a good question, and my guess is that the next Misader Kedushin would look askance, unless it was one. My guess is that at that point, this individual has found 3 rabbis at least who are willing to go along with whatever he's doing. It wouldn't surprise me if one of the 3 performs his wedding, because I think that would be very challenging to find. It doesn't sound like it's above board. I think it doesn't sound like it at all. Yeah. It would. I can't imagine the details where that would be okay. Yeah.
But I think along the lines of Harriet's question, I don't think the Heter de Rabban is throwing out Rabbeinu Gershom. It's not saying that he's allowed to have a second wife. It's saying that he's no longer married and he can marry.
Why is it saying he's
So
no
I
longer
don't-
married?
I-
That would
that's
be-
not my
that's
understanding.
what the
that she
Heter
has
is.
to- That she has to accept the get. In other words, there are two things
I
that
think
have been
that's what the
over-
Heter is, that he's allowed to get divorced without her accepting the get.
Well,
I don't think the Heter is polygamy.
my okay, so I might be wrong. My understanding, I thought, is the way that would work is he would basically almost like you see sometimes process servers. They just like fool you into taking it, and then it's okay. The get still would need to be delivered. It just, if you're going around Rabbeinu Gershom, you can do that without her consent or even knowledge, and just kind of like throw it in her mailbox and have her pick it up. I don't think that's how they do it. I think they just leave it in escrow at the Beit Din, encourage her to come pick it up whenever she's willing to do so, and then, if need be, so then I think that they are secularly divorced, right, in the courts. But I had thought that it circumvents the polygamy ban, but I can't say I'm 100% sure. In any event, with responsible Batei Din, I think this is a very, very rare remedy.
Well, what we hear about, both here and in Israel, but again, it's what we hear about,
Right.
is
right.
that if a rabbi wants to commit this to his buddy or his shul mate or something like that, he takes the heter to a yeshiva, and it's passed around, and all the boys sign it, and you have 100 and you're done. How hard would that be to do that in the mirror? It's a small number of students and they're done. And then that guy marries him.
So I think the point is that you need Batei Din who are going to act responsibly, and to whatever extent you have bad actors, so then the legal system is manipulable. That's often going to be the case. Okay, just to get a little bit back on track. So we pointed out that Rabbeinu Gershom didn't start all this. This was already an opinion of the Gemara. It just was overruled. Rabbi Ami already wanted to eliminate polygamy. And today, there are still other remedies that are being worked on. The issue that we haven't gotten back to yet, but is probably the hottest in terms of people struggling with it. I think our community is also very much struggling to come to terms with it, is the issue of homosexuality. And in today's world, even as opposed to 10 years ago, if you just look at the political shift, it's just been so incredibly dramatic and fast that, but today it really does, it's a hard conversation to have, even with ourselves, about why the Torah comes out where it is. So in terms of, just to review, I think we talked about this last week, male homosexual activity is biblically forbidden. It's one of the Rayot. It is therefore it is Yahareg Va'yavor, right? You would have to martyr yourself. Female homosexual activity is that we assume is prohibited also on a biblical level, but it certainly is not one of the arayot. Fine. So what's up with all that? So we started with a Sefer Chinuch, which was talking about kibbud av v'em. It says that the reason for kibbud av v'em is that we need to engender feelings of gratitude within ourselves. We have to recognize everything that came before us. And then he adds, though, that once we start to do that, if we think, I owe my parents everything because they brought me into the world, that will remind us, oh, well, Hashem really brought me into the world. Well, I owe my parents everything because they fed me and clothed me and gave me love and support when I needed it and when I was vulnerable. And throughout my life, really, God is the one to do that. And what we posited was that maybe that is why the family structure of parents exists. right? That Hashem kind of dropped us, especially in a Golos world, here without much of a lifeline, in a post-prophetic world, and wanted to be able to have this, us to be able to find this way back to remembering a God who we can't see and we can't hear and we can't sense in any physical way. So he put in these tangible intermediaries halfway up the ladder to be able to help us get there. So we have parents because God is our parent, right? Hashem is our father, so we need a father. Hashem is also our mother, and therefore we also need a mother. Now what we suggested is that that's also going to be the case with the slave relationship, right? The fact that we are avadim to Hashem means, if we're really going to understand that, there needs to be an institution of slavery so that we can know what it means when we say, Ana avda dukucha brichu, right? Ani avdacha ben amatecha. It's not that we're a servant, we're slaves, with everything that comes along with that. And what we started getting to is that there are basically 5 relationships that the Torah recognizes as halachically significant. Parent-child, slave-master, those are the 2 that we started. King-subject, right? There are all kinds of rules of kings. If you look in the Rambam, he has a whole sefer on Hochot Melachim. Because again, Hashem is our king. Hashem is not our president. Hashem is not our prime minister. We don't vote him out of office. Hashem is our king, with everything that comes along with that, right? Having our future in his hands and determining yes or no to treat us kindly or cruelly. Hashem is our judge, and therefore there are judges in the world. Hashem is not our friend. There are no laws of friends. Hashem is not our rabbi. There are no laws of rabbis. Right? All of the halachically significant relationships relate to our relationship with Hashem. So let's get back to marriage. Yeah.
So in all these unequal relationships, so Kibbut Avim is the one where the inferior position has obligations to the others. Are those not laws of what the person in the powerful position is obligated to those in the subordinate position?
Often, I think so. And I think there is value in viewing the specific laws, as we'll see in this context. I'll tell you, just this past week, I was listening to Parsha, and I teach. There's a very strange passage that I end up teaching every year, and I was always bothered by it, and students always ask about it, and I never have a particularly good answer. When it comes to adultery, there's a general death penalty for an adulterous relationship, both for the married woman and for the boyfriend. And then there's this special carved out category of a na'ara ha'ma'orasa, which is incredibly narrow, right? It's a woman who is a girl between the age of 12 and 12 and a half, and someone who just reached physical maturity, and who is half married, right? Jewish marriage comes in 2 stages, right? The first step is Kedushin, giving over the kesef Kedushin, the ring we do these days, which forbids the woman to everybody else. And then the last part, Nesuin, taking where the husband symbolically brings the wife into his home, which permits them to each other. So if she's halfway married, if she's in a state of Erusin, so somehow that combination of Na'ara HaMa'orasa brings a worse death penalty. She gets stoned. And it comes up in the Gemara, and we always why is this worse than any other adultery? So we never knew. So Tafka, this past week, I was thinking about it, and it's like you were saying, one of these applications to the details. So what I thought was, I don't know if it's right or wrong, is that if we think back to Chet HaEgel, right? So Chet HaEgel, we started as this infant nation as soon as we came out of Egypt, but when we got the Torah, all of a sudden we became responsible for our actions, which is bat mitzvah, right? That's becoming a nara is when you become responsible for your actions. That's what happened when we got the Torah. Additionally, we got the Torah that was the first step of, as we're going to talk about in a moment, that was the first step of our marriage to Hashem, but Hashem never welcomed us into his home, right? This was pre-Mishkan. And during that intermediate time, that narrow sliver, that's when we abandoned Hashem and cheated on him and found the Chet HaEgel. So maybe, again, I don't know if it's right or wrong, but taking these details of Torah law and seeing how they reflect back to the divine model that I think they're reflecting can sometimes work. I don't know that it always works. Are they responsibilities that Hashem has to us? Maybe. That's a very interesting path to explore. I'm not sure. At this point, I would say that at the very least, the institution needs to be there so that we know what it means. Like we said last week, that during the Seder, when you're doing Sipur Tziyat Mitzrayim, the Rambam says, how do you explain to your child who's not very mature or not very bright, how do you explain what that means? He says, point to your slaves. Say, we were all slaves like him, right? Why? Because we're visual learners. To understand something, we need to be able to relate to it. And I think that these days, we pay a price. We don't really know what it means in Eved to be a slave to Hashem. Because we don't really know slavery. We don't really get it. We don't know what it means that God is our king. Because we don't really think of kings. And when we stand in Shemona Esrei and we say, imagine as if you're standing before the president. Like I remember when I was a kid, they said, imagine if you're standing before the president. Okay, I'm not sure how, I don't know where that gets us these days, right? So we pay a price. We pay a theological price. In the end, democracy works better for people, and therefore, taking the model of Rabbi Ami, of Rabbeinu Gershom, right, to minimize human suffering, but pay the theological price for it, and not be able to relate to Hashem in exactly that way, so that's what we do, right? And therefore, at the time the State of Israel was established, apparently there's literature out there, I haven't found it yet, about conversations, but they didn't try to find someone who was a genetic Ben David and reimpose the monarchy. They went to a democracy like everybody else did. And slavery, thankfully, doesn't exist. But we don't really get it. This is hard, right? I know when I've had this conversation with students, so some of them are very troubled by that. Like, why does Hashem, on the backs of these people who are really suffering, why is it that important? That's not okay to sacrifice the well-being of many, many people for Hashem's relationship with us. It's a hard, and I think it's still hard. I'm not saying that we're solving everything or anything. I think it's a step. What I think it's important to realize is, in today's world, we're very comfortable with the Bein Adam L'Chaveiro part. That's the part of our religion that I tell them, you're going to go out on college campuses and you're going to be very proud of, the laws of Bikur Cholim and Hashav Aveda and V'ahavta Re'echa Kamocha and all of those things you're going to be preaching from the towers. And then the Bein Adam L'Makom parts, you're not going to be as comfortable with because we don't really get it. But fundamentally, I think, and I know that other people won't necessarily agree, I think fundamentally it's, at its core, it's a Bein Adam L'Makom religion. I think V'ahavta Re'echa Kamocha, according to Rabbi Akiva, is the Klal Gadol BaTorah because Hashem commanded us V'ahavta Re'echa Kamocha. Right? I think that's the message of the Akedah. That when push comes to shove, if you have the granddaddy battle royal of them all, of slaughter your son, versus God told you directly to do it, that Bein Adam L'Makom wins. Now, the other message of Akedas Yitzchak is, push will never come to shove. Because God doesn't want you to slaughter your child, and in just about every instance, Hashem wants us to do the right Bein Adam L'Chaveiro move. But in the end, the example that I give them is, if you had to give out based on a scale of 1 to 100, how important to your parents is it that you and your siblings get along? The answer is very, very high. Okay, but is it higher than their relationship with any of you? I don't think so, right? So if God is our parent, so it's essentially important that we all get along with each other. But at the expense of being able to relate to Him, I'm not sure. Okay, so it's not going to be the only thing that we're not going to reach consensus on. So, okay, so let's get back to marriage and divorce. So Hashem, one of our relationships with Hashem is our marriage relationship. If you look in source Chafbet, right, we have this marriage relationship with Hashem, and therefore, if you look in Chav Gimel Chavdal, a little out of order, the Mishnah in Tanis, it talks about where was our marriage to Hashem. Our marriage to Hashem was Matan Torah. Right? There's a lot of marriage imagery in both directions. If you look at our marriage laws and customs, many of them are built off of reflecting Ma'amar Har-Sinai and Kabbalas HaTorah. And that's what it says. It says, B'yom chutanto ze matan Torah. That's what it says in the middle of it there. Fine. And therefore, it has to be, let's look at Chav Gimel. So, before we look at Chav Gimel, sorry about that. The parent relationship we pointed out, Hashem is not gendered, and therefore Hashem is both our father and our mother. In the marriage relationship, it is gendered, right? Hashem is never our wife. Hashem is our husband. Hashem is my husband as much as He's your husband. In the marriage relationship, God is always the male, Knesset Yisrael, all of the people of Israel, man, woman, child, we are all Hashem's wife. God plays the active giving role, and we are the passive receivers. That's the way it was. We were all at Har-Sinai, physiologically. We were all at Har-Sinai. We all received the Torah. Now, our marriage to Hashem, we didn't meet at a singles event and go out for 6 months and decide, is this? No. God chose us, and God gave us the Torah. And therefore, let's start with one side of divorce, okay? How do you opt out of Judaism? How do you convert out of Judaism? You can't, right? That's source Chav Gimel. Yisrael afal pi shechata Yisrael. No matter what, no matter how bad a Jew I choose to become, I can't convert out.
I thought if you went to
Now, sorry?
But if you went to marry, they said sugar for you, so that's not opting out.
It's not opting out. You're still a Jew. You're just not.
Right.
There's no such thing. There's no opt-out clause. Now, in the human reflection, that sounds awful. Oh, a woman has no way out of a marriage, right? A man does, but a woman has. God could have chosen another nation had He wanted to, but in the divine model, it's incredibly comforting. What that means is that no matter how badly I mess up this relationship with Hashem, it's unbreakable, right? So, I think this is going to become a recurring theme. Something that can be really beautiful in the idealized divine relationship, when we reflect it down here, isn't always going to look as beautiful. And therefore, the Chachmei Hador are going to come in and clean up some of the imbalances and pain that's caused from it. But the fact that we can't opt out of our marriage relationship with Hashem is something incredibly comforting, especially if you look back at the entirety of the history of the Jewish people. We mess up a lot. And therefore, the unbreakable nature of that bond is definitely works in our favor. Now, this next part, if you don't like it, I get to blame the Maharal. Someone pointed out to me afterwards. I was nervous about saying this. I actually gave this with leaving this piece out, and then I told it to somebody, and he left. He's like, "What? You thought you said that?" Maharal said it a long time ago. Okay, here we go. The relationship, the marriage relationship that we have with Hashem, If we look back, there's a medrash that says, Kaf aleim har kegigit. What does that mean? God lifted the mountain over our heads, and he said, if you accept the Torah, great. If you don't accept the Torah, Shem teik furaschem, right? I'm going to bury you over here. So there are lots of Agadic interpretations about what that means. They say on Purim that we went back and we accepted, whatever it is. The Maharal points out, if you look on in source Chav Zayin, he notes the psukim in Chavav. What this means is that our initial marital relationship with God was compelled. It was non-consensual. What are the rules in human Torah law of a non-consensual sexual relationship? One of the consequences is that if she chooses, the victim is permitted, is not compelled, is permitted to have her attacker marry her and is never permitted to divorce her. Note, this is post Naaseh v'Nishma. We had already said we want to accept the Torah very willingly. If that's the case, why did God need to force us? So the Maharal explains that even though in this marriage relationship, in theory, we couldn't get out, but he could, because there's one-sided divorce and the man can end the marriage relationship. He constructed the marriage in a way that would bind him to us as well. He's forced to marry us, and lo yuchal shalcha kol yamav. He's never permitted to divorce her. Once again, sounds really, really awful on the human level, but at least to me, you can receive it how you want, reflects something, I'm going to avoid adjectives over here. Take it as you want. If you don't like it, please take it up with the Maharal. Fine. And in terms of polygamy as well, right? In other words, if God had wanted to have another nation in addition to us, so that's certainly, it's not necessarily a good idea. Thankfully, he never did it, but it's certainly within his menu of options. Just bringing it back for a second to slavery, we mentioned at the beginning that just beyond the morally troubling piece, there just seems to be this extra gratuitous part to the laws, right? It says "Olam behem tavodu," that there's a prohibition to free a slave. And we weren't like, come on, like they're a slave. But if the owner wants to free the slave, they're not allowed to free the slave? So I think that's the same thing as the one-sided divorce, right? That in our slave relationship, no matter how bad we are at performing, at being an Eved Hashem, he can never sever that relationship, right? Once again, in the human field, things get messy, but it reflects something beautiful about our relationship with Hashem. Fine. Let's wrap it up, and then we'll take all comers. Bringing this to the topic of homosexuality. If every marital relationship, if every sexual relationship is meant to mirror the divine marriage between us and God, where where the male represents God and the female represents Knesset Yisrael, so what happens if you substitute out the female and replace it with another male? What do you have? Two gods. Right? And therefore, perhaps, we don't know anything. Those of you who weren't here last week, we did many, many disclaimers. I'll give them to you later if you want. Perhaps male homosexuality is not prohibited because it is icky or immoral or disgusting or any of these things. It just represents Avodah Zarah. And therefore, we don't do things that represent Avodah Zarah. We know, I find this helpful because I know what those laws look like, right? There are things that we don't do because Avodah Zarah is really bad And if they represent symbolically even, they represent Avodah Zarah, so they're off the table, right? It doesn't mean that this person is unethical or evil or bad or lesser in any. We just can't do that because God said so. Because it represents something that is out. And also that helps us understand the difference between male homosexuality and female homosexuality, right? In other words, female homosexuality, so what is that? That's a relationship between Knesset Yisrael and Knesset Yisrael. It's not particularly inspiring in the way that our relationship with God is, but it's not particularly offensive either, right? But to gods, that's something entirely different. That's a game we don't play, right? The Torah refers to the prohibition of male homosexuality as a toiva, right? What's toiva? Toiva means an abomination. So what does an abomination mean? So I think if you look in the last source Lamed, it says, it uses the language of toiva again. And this requires further study about other places where it comes up, but here's one of them. It says that Evan Shlema, Tzedek Yallah, that your weights and measures need to be tzedek, right? If you're running a business, so your weights, your scales, that's a very easy way to cheat, so you can't do that. And if you actually do use your scales to cheat, to'avat Hashem elokecha, that's an abomination. Why? Because what you're doing is you're taking the scale. The scale is meant to be a mechanism for truth, right? That's the way to be so sure that you're being honest. And you're taking that mechanism for truth and you're totally turning it upside down for yourself, for your own gain. That's toiva, right? So if you go and you take the mechanism that's meant to reflect the monogamous relationship between Klal Yisrael and Hashem, and you take it and flip it to be the opposite, to represent Avodah Zarah, that's toiva. But again, for me, it makes me, and I've gotten mixed results, we probably will today as well. What I prefer about that is that's the kind of law, Torah law, that I recognize, and it interpersonally, it means that it's just very bein adam l'makom, right? It's just God saying it because it represents Avodah Zarah. That's what we do. Now, it happens to be that this is going to be different than polygamy and one-sided divorce and slavery and governmental structure, because, as we pointed out, in all those other instances, so how do you fix the societal problem? How do you fix the pain that's caused? To the best of our ability, we say what the Torah said was okay is now no longer okay. Don't have multiple wives. Don't divorce your wife against her will. Don't have a slave, right? Have a democracy. All those are relatively easy fixes. If the Torah says no, even in the face of pain, sometimes the answer is just no. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not, obviously it's no with understanding and with sensitivity and with working, and this is what I think our community still has a lot of work to do to deal with the peripheral issues, but sometimes you can't turn a square into a circle. And a pasuk that says that something is prohibited is going to be very, very, very challenging to, we don't have that kinds of appeals process, or not that I'm aware of. Okay, so let's do a little bit of feedback and hopefully we'll get to some lighter material. Thoughts, questions, attacks? No? You want to save it all for afterwards? Okay, so let's get at least a little lighter. That took a lot longer than I thought it would. I apologize for that. But I think it's important. I hope it was okay. Once again, if that's not your cup of tea, we're not done. I'm hoping that we can do a little more now. We still have time. If that's not your cup of tea, the rest is going to be very, very different. So let's talk a little bit about the makot. So if you look at the beginning of the makot, what we notice for dam, for tzvadeh, for king, we can do this a little faster. It always says that to whom did the makot come? It always says Kol Mitzrayim, right? B'chol Eretz Mitzrayim. all of a sudden, you get to Makkah number 4. Here, this is hole punched, unstapled, only on one side. My settings were all messed up. These things, it says on the top, sharing their pain, the plagues, and the Jews. Are we together?
Yes.
Okay. You get to Makkah number 4, to plague number 4. So when you have the water turns to blood, the frogs come, the lice come, all it says is that all these plagues hit the land of Egypt. All of a sudden, you hit the 4th plague, Aro, and if you look all the way, the last lines of the page, Pasuk Yudchet, the bolded sessions, it says, "Vehifleiti bayom hahu et eretz Goshen asher ami omed aleha levoti hayot sham arov." Right? Vehifleiti means I will separate. I will separate on that day the land of Goshen, where my people are living, that there won't be any wild animals over there. Right? Wild animals will infiltrate through the entire land of Egypt, but not Goshen. He says in the next pasuk, "V'samti pedut." Pedut is almost like a machitza, right? I'll put a separation benami uvenamecha, between my nation and your nation. Now, this happens for the first time in Makat Arov. So, what are we supposed to understand about blood, frogs, and lice? So, the seeming implication of the psukim is that they didn't discriminate, right? If all of a sudden Hashem is telling us that He's starting to discriminate when we hit the wild animals, it seems to imply that until then, that was not the case. Now, I certainly was not taught this growing up, and there's a good reason. The Medrash clearly implies not that way, or at least certain Midrashim clearly imply not that way. Right? There's a well-known Medrash. Let's go back to Makat Dam, to the blood for a little while. How did they last a week without water? You can't last a week without water, right? So how did they last a week without water? So I remember, I was always taught, and the Medrash says that if the Egyptians bought the water from the Jews, so that stayed as water, right? But clearly implying that the Jews had water. So the Ibn Ezra, if you look in source Hay, so he actually says outright against the Midrashim like this, he says that the first 3 makot, blood, frogs, lice, he says that they also hit the Jews. Second page, sorry, they're all one-sided. The second page will start with Hey Ibn Ezra. Hey Ibn Ezra. I apologize for the confusion. Next week, please God, we'll get it right. So he says that, in fact, as the psukim seem to imply, that the first 3 makot also hit the Jews as well. In addition to the Egyptians, it hit all of the land of Egypt. If that's the case, you have a couple of questions, right? You have one very technical question. How did they survive for a week without water, right? Maybe, so the Jews had frogs? Okay, so the Jews had frogs, and they had lice. Fine. But how did they survive a week without water? So if you go back and you look back in source Aleph, on the sheet that you started with, the pasuk addresses this very clearly. I was shocked to see that it was a pasuk. If you look in the second to last pasuk of the source, pasuk of Dalet, it says, right, everything turned to blood. And just giving you a little bit of background until what happened until now. And the Egyptian magicians also turned water into blood. Again, implying that they had water not just to drink, but to turn into blood. After all of the water Moshe had already turned all the water into blood, or Aaron had already turned all the water into blood, right? So, where did that all come from? So Pasuk of Dalet said, "Vayachberu kol Mitzrayim svivot hayar mayim lishtot, ki lo yachlu lishtot b'meimei hayar." They dug new wells to drink water because they couldn't drink the water from the Nile. It seems black and white. What happened when Aaron struck the Nile? The Nile water, surface water, turned to blood. But if they dug wells, they had water to drink, right? It wasn't the way that I had always envisioned it, the way that the Medrash says, which is that all the water everywhere turned to blood. It was whatever water was on the surface at the time, but they were able to dig. Now, okay, that's the technical problem that's created by the Ibn Ezra's approach, that the Jews were hit by the first 3 makot. The bigger question is, what was the point of these makot, right? The point of the makot was to punish Egypt for oppressing the Jews. So why would we be punishing the victim for the crime that was committed against them? Right? Why would Hashem bring these makot against the Jews if their whole motivation was to save them? Yeah.
Wasn't it also to show Hashem's power? The whole, not only a punishment, but that's also good to show the slaves.
Okay, do you think, okay, good. Let's just play this out. I guess, based on what we've been talking about for the last 45 minutes, maybe you're right, right? I was going to say, wouldn't it have been good enough for the Jews to see that the Egyptians have blood and water, and blood instead of water, and that they have frogs, and that they're scratching all over the place?
We certainly haven't learned that by example.
So I
That's
guess...
not just good enough to see what other people.
Okay, you're right. So maybe they needed to feel it. Good, okay. Good, I hadn't thought of that. Excellent. I guess we can go home. Okay, no. So alternatively, I think that, and this is also, not everybody would agree with the following, but I think there's another possibility. If you look in source Vav, let's skip to the very end of the Makkah. So we get to the last Makkah, the plague against the firstborn, Makkah Bechoros. It says, Vayhi b'chatzi halayla, it was at midnight, Hashem hika kol bechor be'eretz Mitzrayim, God smote every firstborn in the land of Egypt, Mibchor Paro, from the firstborn of Paro HaYoshev Kiso, who was sitting on his throne, and Bechor HaShevi, until the firstborn of the captive, among the captives, Asher Bebeit Habor, who was in the prison, Bechol Bechor Behema. And in the animal world, every firstborn animal was struck, died. So Rashi is bothered by, like, is this justice? So again, who deserved to be smitten? Paro, clearly. Egypt, fine. That's fair enough. The captives? What did their captives do? They're sitting in prison. So Rashi is bothered by this, and he gives two possibilities. If you look in Source Zion, number one, he says misery loves company. So therefore, they were always happy. Oh, you know what? I have a miserable life here in prison. Thank God I'm not Jewish, right? So therefore, they were being punished for that. Alternatively, they're each worshiping their own little idol. So they see that the Egyptians are being attacked with all these plagues. They're going to say, my idol, look how great my idol is, right? It's going and is attacking my oppressors. So therefore, they get hit also to show that that it wasn't their idol, that was really Hashem. Okay. Rashi likes very, very strict person-to-person justice, straight throughout. Always. He always tries to do that. But what seems to be going on here is, while it's true that Judaism does not engage in, that Jewish justice does not engage in I'm forgetting my word, the Christian notion of being punished for somebody else's sin, vicarious liability, what it does believe in is communal liability. And therefore, let me ask you a question. Were there children in Sodom? Almost certainly, right? Were there people in Sodom who were not evil enough to merit being destroyed? I would think so. But the way I think that justice works in the Torah is that if you're part of a community and the community merits punishment, unless you do something to extricate yourself from that community, so then you get swallowed up with it. It's not being punished vicariously, but in order to say, I'm no longer this, I need to take that action. Yeah.
That is very difficult when you apply it to children.
It is.
And I am thinking of the Haftorah that we read, was it last week or the week before? Where, involving Saul's being stripped of the kingship.
Yes.
But the beginning, where you are referring to God tell Saul to slaughter
them all.
all. And even children are singled out,
Yeah.
was it Tafad,
Yeah.
you know, of
Amalek, right.
Amalek, and that's very difficult.
Look, so this is a hard question
It is.
that every different people deal with in different ways. I think Rav Dessler has this notion that sometimes someone can be brought into the world initially just for the purpose of being ultimately stricken. That the entire it's a hard question.
Question and hard, it's the answer that's difficult.
Well, I don't know that there are good answers, and therefore maybe we work with the least bad answer. I think, I don't know. So this is a theory. Obviously, look, you're in good company. Rashi clearly was not happy to go there. So I think the point, possibly, is that that's the way that communal justice works. And if you want out, you need to declare, I am different, right? Fine. And therefore, if we look at Bnei Yisrael in Egypt, so we know, Halalu Ovdei Avodah Zarah, V'Halalu Ovdei Avodah Zarah, that the Jews in Mitzrayim were at a very low spiritual level. And therefore, when the Makot started, they were just Egyptian slaves. And therefore, even though it was coming as a punishment for what they were doing to the Jews, it was coming on Egypt, and they were just a part of Egyptian society. And therefore, their water turned to blood, and they had the frogs, and they had the lice. So what changed? So perhaps, a little bit of a jump over here, perhaps the following. When the Jews were released from Egypt, presumably, as all these makot were happening, they weren't reporting to work as slaves every day throughout darkness and hail, and right, at some point that stopped. So the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah says, when did all that stop? On Rosh Hashanah, right? Rosh Hashanah is 6.5 months before Yetziat Mitzrayim. So at that point, Batla Avodah Me'avotenu b'Mitzrayim. That's when the shibud, the active labor of slavery, that's when that stopped. So what is that in our story? So if you look, the Nimukei Harid over here in Tet, he's dealing with an entirely separate issue. He's basically saying, how could the hail have destroyed barley agriculturally? That doesn't make any sense, based on the time of year that it was. Why? So he says, how could there possibly be barley in Tevit, in the middle of the winter? So he says, the Makot started in Tammuz. Each Makkah had its own month. So go and count that the hail came in Tevit, which is the middle of the winter. There shouldn't have been any barley. And if you look at the notes over there, it does the math for us. What it says is that, okay, so Dam is Tammuz, Av is Tzvardeya, Elul is Kinim, Tishrei is Arov. What that means is Rosh Hashanah was the day in between the end of the month of lice, the third plague, and the beginning of the fourth plague, the wild animals. So the day that the shibud stopped, that the labor stopped, that's the day that Hashem declared V'samti pedut bein ani u'bein amecha. So what happened on that day? What happened on Rosh Hashanah? So perhaps, if we look much earlier in the story, it says that at the time Melech Mitzrayim died, Vaye'anchu b'nei Yisrael min ha'avodah vayizaku el Hashem. Right? The simple reading of the word Vaye'anchu is they groaned on the day that he died, and they turned to Hashem, they screamed to Hashem, Hashem listened to them, and that starts the Geula, the redemption process, is Hashem listening to them and remembering his promise. So I once heard someone explain, why would they groan when Melech Mitzrayim died? So the simplest answer is that they saw that the new king wasn't going to be any better than the old king. They had held out hope that things might improve, and they didn't. I once heard an interpretation, I wish I remembered where I heard it, that Vaye'anchu comes from the language of nach, to rest. Meaning, he died, they got a day off for the state funeral, and then how did they spend that free minute that they had? They cried out to Hashem. And that allowed Hashem to be able to say, look, are they great tzaddikim? They're not great tzaddikim. But how could they be? They're being oppressed, they're being tortured. There's no way they possibly could. They have a free moment, they turned to me, that's good enough. Perhaps on Rosh Hashanah, after Makat Kinim, the shibud stops, maybe they had a similar reaction. Maybe at that moment, they all turned to Hashem, and that is enough. That little turn can be enough for Hashem to say, you know what, you're not just Egyptian slaves anymore. You're the ones who turn to me. Right? That's enough to extricate yourself. We're different than the Egyptians, and therefore we don't need to be punished with wild animals going forward. Just as a postscript, if you look in the Torah, there's no indication that Rosh Hashanah is a day of tshuva. We treat Rosh Hashanah as a day of tshuva, possibly because of its proximity to Yom Kippur, which the Torah does treat as a day of tshuva. But where do we get that from? Perhaps that was the first communal day where we all turned to Hashem in an act of tshuva, which we commemorate forever with Rosh Hashanah. Okay, I don't want to go over or too much over. Yasher Koach. Hope to see you all going forward.
Wow.